My name is David. I'm 72 years old, and until recently I thought I knew my own family well. Have you ever wondered what makes a child turn his back on those who have helped him the most in life? Can you imagine discovering, in the cruelest way possible, that everything you gave with love, was it being used against you? I've lived a lifetime of hard work. I've built houses, built businesses, endured loss and pain without ever lowering my head. After my wife Ellen left, it was my granddaughter Chloe who kept my heart beating with meaning. She's just an 8-year-old girl, but she was the only one who really saw me. In this video, I'm going to tell you how a phrase whispered in the middle of a party changed everything. You will understand how in silence I discovered the truth, and how I responded with something that even my own son did not expect. What breaks us is not always a scream. Sometimes it's a whisper coming from a child's mouth. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. Not all betrayal comes screaming. Sometimes it arrives slowly, hidden in the voice of those who have not yet learned to lie. The night it all happened, I was smiling, surrounded by colorful balloons and children's songs. And it was in the middle of that party, at the exact moment when I thought I was living a happy day, that my granddaughter approached and whispered in my ear, "Grandpa, tonight my parents are going to take away their fortune." What happened after that, no one in my family has ever forgotten, and what I discovered that night changed everything I believed about love, loyalty, and blood. If you've come this far, it's because you may have felt something similar. And if this story touches any of your wounds, I only ask one thing. Stay with me until the end. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel. Not as a favor, but as a gesture of someone who understands. Sometimes we need to hear that we are not alone. I'll tell you everything, but I need to feel that there is someone there, listening with an open heart. It was a very early Saturday when the phone rang. The sound cut through the silence of my kitchen like a knife in glass. I was already up, as always, calmly drinking my coffee and reading the newspaper from the day before. It's been a long time since the news surprises me anymore. But that call, yes, it was my son Brian. "Dad, how are you?" I noticed right away that there was something different in his tone. Nervous, hurried, trying to look casual. But I know my son. It grew under my roof. I knew when he was hiding something. The last time he spoke in that trembling voice, he was 17 years old and had crashed my car into the driveway. "Everything is fine here. Why? Did something happen?" No. It's just, Chloe turns 8 today, remember? And we're having a little party for her here at home in Beaverton. Karen is organizing everything, and it will be very beautiful." I was silent for a second. I never missed my granddaughter's birthday. I never needed to be invited. Of course I remember. I was going to show up anyway. Yes, I know, but we really wanted you to come earlier. Before the guests arrived. There are a few things we wanted to talk to you about. Family matters, you know? Family matters. It hit my chest weird. 3 years of widowhood, and in all that time, we never had to schedule a conversation about family matters. Everything always flowed at the lunch table, between one cup of coffee and another. Now suddenly, did you need a moment of secrecy? And what kind of subject, Brian? Oh, no big deal. Some ideas from Karen, things about the future, about how we can get better organized, family involvement. Is that it? The word Karen ignited an alert inside me. Not that she was openly rude to me, but she always had a look. Too practical. As if I were part of the family furniture, useful, but outdated. And that comment of hers weeks ago was still hammering in my head. I remember it as if it were now. She ran her eyes over my kitchen and blurted out of nowhere, "David, have you ever thought about living in a more adapted place? There are some beautiful assisted living communities around here. You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance, it's all easier." At the time I laughed, but then it stayed there throbbing. I built this house. Every corner has a story. Every crack in the wall has my sweat. And she wanted to see me get out of here? Why did it become too big? Back on that call, I made an effort to keep my voice neutral. "That's right, Brian. I'll be there at 1:30 p.m. I want to give Chloe's gift by hand." He let out a "perfect" too quickly, as if he wanted to hang up right away. But after the call dropped, I stared at the phone for a long time. Something was wrong. My instinct told me that. And it wasn't just old man paranoia. It was the same instinct that saved me from making bad deals my whole life. Something in my son's tone hurt me. It was like he was trying to sell me something, or prepare for a coup. I went back to my chair and looked at the garage door. I parked my gaze there for long seconds. 3 years since Ellen left. And since then, a lot has changed. Except the way I feel when the air changes indoors. They were planning something, and it wasn't just Chloe's party. I remember that I got up and went to the garden. The rose bushes Ellen planted were beginning to bloom, even in the cold spring. She said that flowers grew best when they were watered with silence. And that's what I did that Saturday. I was silent, but inside, a noise was already beginning to grow. No, there are things that a father never wants to think about. May your own child see you as an obstacle, that someone in your family sees in you only numbers in a bank account. But that Saturday brought me that kind of thought, and I wanted to be wrong, but it wasn't. Allow me a pause here. We spend our lives teaching our children, showing right and wrong, paying the bills so that they can study, grow, build their own path. But there comes a time that their silence weighs more than any debt paid. Have you ever felt that? That the one you helped the most moved away at the moment you most needed a sincere hug? If this has ever touched any corner of your heart, write here in the comments. Something simple. I believe. I've lived it. Or just touched me. Sometimes, sharing helps us breathe better. That Saturday I prepared my clothes with the same care as always. I chose the blue shirt that Ellen liked. I put on perfume, straightened my hair with my hands, and looked at my reflection for long minutes. In that image in the mirror, I still saw a whole man, but something told me that after that party I would no longer recognize myself in the same way, because what Brian and Karen wanted to tell me, it wasn't just a family affair, it was a disguised warning, and what I was going to find out there, well, that would forever change the way I saw my own last name. But what would my granddaughter have to do with all this? And why would that party be the last with a real taste? The next morning, I left home early and went to the Lloyd Center Mall, right here in Portland. It was Chloe's birthday, and if there's one thing I never missed for her, it was presents, and a gift that would make those big eyes she pulled from her grandmother shine. I entered a toy store and walked through the aisles as if scrolling through memories. I remembered the first time she called me Grandpa, the time she fell off her bike and asked for my lap even before her mother arrived. I got the Lego from the White House. She loves to assemble things. She pulled her grandfather's builder side, and a new bike, dark blue with a basket in front. I kept imagining her smile. There, at that moment, all I wanted was to see her happy, without even dreaming of what was to come. On the way out of the mall, I came face to face with Martha, my neighbor across the street. She had that curious way, always with a bag of bread and a lot of history in her mouth. David, what a good surprise. You're going to give your granddaughter a gift today, right? I saw his truck and thought, look at the dedicated grandpa. I smiled and nodded, but before I could say goodbye, she let go unceremoniously. Oh, and these days I saw Brian and his wife at the First National. They had a folder full of documents talking loudly about legal procedures and change of responsibility. They left a little tense, see? That sentence fell like a brick in my chest. What day was that, Martha? Last Tuesday. It was close to noon, I think. I thought they were solving something in the house. I thanked him, said goodbye with a wave, and went back to the car. On the way, I tried to convince myself that Martha, despite being a good neighbor, was given to exaggerations. I always saw more than I should. Maybe it was documents from Chloe's school, maybe paperwork from their house, I don't know. But deep down, something told me no. It connected with Brian's speech on the phone, and with that forced smile of Karen on the last visit. I remember that a few days before they came here with a cake and grape juice, out of the blue. They sat in the living room, praised every detail of the house, talked about how I was fine for my age. Karen even joked, David, with all this energy, you're still going to bury us. At the time, everyone laughed. But then, alone, the phrase sounded more like a prediction than a joke. These details, these little pieces, they were all starting to fall into place. But I didn't want to put this puzzle together, because every time I fit apart, the image that emerged was ugly, it was heavy, and it showed something that my heart refused to accept. My own son preparing me for a kind of abandonment that came with a bank signature and stamp. Even so, I tried to silence this feeling. I clung to Chloe's smile, the vanilla scent she always leaves on my coat when she hugs me. I clung to Ellen's memory, saying, don't think badly ahead of time, David. Trust is the last wall that breaks down. And so even with everything hammering, I decided to go to the party with an open heart. Bringing the gifts, singing happy birthday, being the present grandfather I always was. Maybe it was all just nonsense in my head. Perhaps Martha had misunderstood. Perhaps. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't. And now I wonder, what else did they hide in that black folder? And why, among all the days of the year, did they choose Chloe's birthday to give me this message? I arrived at their house around 2 in the afternoon, with the gifts in the trunk, and my heart tightened, although I tried to disguise it. The facade was all decorated with pink balloons, posters with Chloe's name, and one of those artificial flower arches that Karen loved to use to look good in the photos. I took a deep breath before ringing the bell, as if I knew that when I crossed that door, something in me would not come back the same. Karen opened it with a smile as wide as it was fake. He gave me 2 kisses on the cheek, something he had never done before, and said, "David, what an honor to have you here. You are wonderful, even rejuvenated." I thought it was strange, but I smiled back. She pulled me by the hand, as if she wanted to show off. Brian came right after, glass in hand, calling me our wise old man, the master builder, the grandfather of the year, and he completed by saying loudly to the guests, "This man here is the reason we are all together. None of this would be possible without him." I felt like I was on a stage. Each compliment felt like a rehearsed script. They spoke with a twinkle in their eyes, but it was an audience glow, not a real one. Too many people, too many voices, hugs that didn't warm up at all. But in the middle of it all, I saw Chloe in the backyard. She was wearing a blue dress, the same shade as her mother's eyes. When he saw me, he dropped the cupcake he was holding and ran to me. He jumped on my lap as he always did. He hugged me tightly, but in that embrace I felt a tremor. "Grandpa," she whispered, but before she could complete, Karen yelled, "Chloe, come and take a picture with your little friends." She looked at me in a way I had never seen before, a look loaded with something that children should not carry. He seemed to want to tell me something, but he kept silent. I saw Karen take her by the hand and smile at me from afar as if to say, "Don't worry, everything is under control." I went back to the main room and started to observe. Brian pacing back and forth, checking his phone every 2 minutes. Karen receiving guests with too much sympathy. And between one laugh and another, the two exchanged quick glances. A nod, a whisper in the hallway. There was something in the air, and it wasn't just the smell of the cake. A friend of Brian's, who I didn't even know, came to talk to me. He said he heard a lot about me, that Brian said I was the pillar of the family. I smiled politely, but inside the phrase hurt me, because those who are real have never needed advertising. And who needs to invent virtue from others? Usually it's covering up some lack of your own soul. After an hour, I noticed that one of the rooms had the door ajar. I passed slowly and saw on the table a black folder with partially exposed leaves. I recognized the symbol of the First National Bank in the corner of one of them. I heard footsteps and walked away. Brian appeared soon after, closing the door with a slight push as if keeping a secret. The party continued. Congratulations cake, too many photos. But everything seemed choreographed, as if they had rehearsed every detail. The only thing that didn't fit in that script was my growing distrust, and Chloe's eyes, which were looking for me all the time as if silently asking for help. And it was then, in the midst of that colorful farce, that I realized they were about to act, and about to hear something that would change everything. But what exactly did they want to tell me after the party? And why did they seem so sure that I wasn't going to react? The party was already moving towards the end when I decided to get away from the mess a little. My heart was restless, but I still tried to believe that it was something in my head. I went to the corridor of the bedrooms, pretending to look for the bathroom, just to breathe a little away from that staging. The hallway was silent. The light coming in filtered through the small window. And it was there, in that brief moment of pause, that I heard small footsteps coming behind me. It was Chloe. She came slowly, holding her own arm with her trembling little hand. His eyes were downcast, but his mouth wanted to speak. I bent down, touched her shoulder, and asked softly, "Is everything okay, my flower?" She looked me in the eye, and I swear, I've never seen so much weight in such a small look. "Grandpa, tonight my parents are going to take away their fortune." Time froze. The noise of the party disappeared. His heart raced, and everything in me had to hold on to the doorframe so as not to fall. "How is it, dear?" She whispered again, now closer. "I heard. They were talking yesterday. That you have too much money for someone alone. that he's too old to take care of all this. They said that today they were going to convince you to sign some papers, and that after that you would rest. But in their own way, the words hit my mind like a hammer. Each syllable was a betrayal that I never imagined living. Chloe looked at me with teary eyes. I didn't want to tell you, Grandpa, but I was afraid. Are you leaving? I knelt right there in the middle of the hallway and hugged my granddaughter tightly. I ran my hand through her hair and whispered in her ear, I'm not going anywhere. Promise. But inside, I was no longer the same man who walked through that door. Everything made sense now. The forced excitement, the exaggerated speech, the folder of documents hidden in the room, the phone conversation about family matters. They didn't want to talk. They wanted to execute. They wanted to take what I had built with decades of work, sweat and renunciations, and they were willing to use any strategy to do so, even involving his own daughter, even if indirectly. I got up slowly, wiping away the tears I didn't let fall. Chloe looked at me as someone who seeks protection, but also as someone who carries guilt. Guilt for having counted. Guilt for loving my parents and loving me too. No child should be put in that position. I held her hand, took it back to the backyard and said in the most serene voice I could, Go play, my angel. Grandpa's fine. She obeyed, but before leaving she gave me one last look. And in that look I saw the urgency to do something, not just for me, but for her. I sat on one of the benches in the garden, watching the guests saying goodbye, taking the last pictures. Karen came and went, always smiling too much. Brian was now talking to someone on the phone, pacing back and forth near the grill, holding the black briefcase again. And I was there, in silence, watching the board. You know, telling this here is not easy, but it is necessary. And if you've made it this far, I thank you. Because opening your heart after a stab like that, it is only possible when we feel that there is someone listening on the other side. So, if you're with me, if this story touches you in any way, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. That to me is like a nod from someone saying, I'm here, David. That's it. This strengthens me to keep telling, because from that moment on, everything changed. I knew I couldn't trust it anymore, and I also knew that I couldn't react angrily. I was going to need something bigger, cold, silent, definitive. But how does he diffuse a coup set up by those who carry his blood? The answer? I found out the next morning, and that's where my plan began. When the congratulations were over and the guests began to say goodbye, I went back to walking around the yard as if nothing had happened. Chloe was already with her friends, running between the deflating balloons and the pieces of cake forgotten on the tables. I looked at her with tenderness and sadness. Such a small child, carrying on his back the awareness of a betrayal that should not even exist. I approached her, lowered slowly, and gave her one last hug before leaving. She squeezed me tightly, and in that squeeze, I swear I felt her heart asking for help without saying anything. It'll be okay, my flower, Grandpa promised, I said in a low voice. I went back inside like someone coming back from a war. Every step he took through the house now had another meaning. The hallway, the living room, the kitchen, everything there was the scene of what almost became a coup against me. I passed Brian, who was on the porch having a beer and looking at his phone. Father, it's not going away now, right? We still wanted to talk quickly. I turned to him with the best smile I could forge. I know, son, but I have a headache. It must be the heat. We talk later, without haste. He grimaced in disappointment but nodded. All right then, I'll call you tomorrow. I'm waiting. Karen appeared soon after, already taking off her smudged makeup and saying something about cleaning the house. I said goodbye to both of them calmly, took one last look at Chloe and went to the car. I went in, started the engine, but I didn't leave. I stood there for a few minutes looking in the rearview mirror at that house that was supposed to be a home, but now looked like just a stage set up to deceive me. The way back to Laurelhurst was almost automatic. I don't even remember the traffic lights, nor the radio, nor the wind coming in through the window. I only remember the feeling of being swallowed inside, and when I parked in front of my house, the world went silent. I opened the door, left the empty presents in the corner of the room, and walked straight to Ellen's rocking chair, there on the back porch. I sat down as I did every evening, but this time, there was no tea, no newspaper, no smell of her lavender on the pillows, only silence. I looked at the family photos on the furniture. Ellen in her blue linen dress, holding baby Chloe. Brian on graduation day. Me and my father on the land of the first house I built. Everything there. Frozen. But today, all that seemed like a lie. The question that took me was simple but painful. Where did I go wrong? I spent my life building for them. Every block, every wall, every decision. When Brian got into debt, I was the one who covered it. When Karen wanted to go back to school, I was the one who paid for it. When Chloe was born prematurely and they needed support, I was the one who slept in the hospital 3 nights in a row so they could rest. I never charged anything. Because a father's love has no receipt. Or at least it shouldn't. But now, all of this seemed to have become just a number in their heads. A number they wanted to take. Control. To close as if I were an outdated chapter of their history. I stayed there until night fell completely. The only light was from the kitchen on, reflecting on the windows. I listened to the ticking of the clock on the wall, as if each second marked the end of a cycle. For the first time since Ellen left, I felt really alone in that house, but deep down there was a flame. Still shy, still painful, but live. Do they think I'm too old to take care of what's mine? So maybe it's time to show that time doesn't take away the strength of those who built everything with their own hands. But how to start a plan, when the pain still burns in the chest, and your own child's name is the most painful to pronounce. The house was quiet. The kind of silence that only those who live alone know. A silence that breathes with you, that listens to your thoughts, that sometimes even seems to respond with cracks in the wood of the floor. I got up from Ellen's chair with a weight on my chest and went to the hallway. I stopped in front of the door of my old office, which nowadays only served to store memories and dust. I opened it slowly, as if I were awakening a sacred place. The smell of old wood and stored paper gave me a kind of comfort. Memory has a smell, and that was the smell of my lucidity. I turned on the yellow light on the lamp, which flashed twice before firming up. I approached the bookshelf, and there, behind 2 thick copies of American architecture, was the small brass key. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one Ellen called the drawer of truth. And it was. Everything that mattered was there. Documents, copies of contract, statements, transfer receipts. I took them out one by one, separating, reading calmly, and each paper was like a confirmation stab. That's exactly $85,370 that came out of my account over the past 3 years. All for Brian and Karen. Down payment on the house, car, Chloe's school, travel, dentist, kitchen renovation. And worse, many of these deposits had been urgent requests. Those phone calls that started with, "Dad, I'm sorry to call you now, but..." And they ended with me saying, "Don't worry, I'll find a way." I would find a way. I always did. But now, they wanted to find a way. In me. I opened an old notebook with a blue hardcover and started writing. Name of my trusted lawyer, Marlene Rosenthal, a Jewish lady with firm speech and lively eyes. He defended me when the city wanted to embargo a work of mine back in 1994. Then I listed, independent notary, full review of the will, blocking old powers of attorney, creating a trust for Chloe, separate, shielded, untouchable. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel old. I felt alive, lucid, ready, like a general who, after decades of peace, returns to map his battlefield. The night passed slowly. Every page I read, every receipt I reread, seemed to give me back a piece of me that they had tried to rip off. And the more I reviewed the numbers, the more I saw that they didn't just want my inheritance. They wanted my end. They wanted to control my name, my history, my sweat, to put myself in a corner chair and turn me into a useful signature to the last drop. It was there, between open folders and drawn plans, that I whispered to myself, almost without realizing it, "They won't touch anything I've built. Nothing. And you who are here listening to me, know that the most remarkable moment in this story is yet to come, because when a wounded man stands up in silence, the world around you doesn't even notice, but it has already started to turn. When the sun rose, the sky had that gray color that heralds a long day. I made strong coffee. I drank it standing up, looking out the kitchen window. Ellen's garden is still in bloom, the petals starting to fall. I picked up the phone and dialed Marlene's number. The cell phone rang twice. "Hello? Marlene, I need to review my will. Today." She didn't ask why. He only answered with the coldness of someone who understands true urgencies. "I'll meet you in my office at 4. Turned off. I went to the room, changed my clothes as if I were going to work. I put on perfume, straightened my hair, put on my dark leather shoes, the same one from Ellen's funeral. Today was not a day of mourning, but of decision, and so began my counterattack. But could I act without them noticing? Or were they already 2 steps ahead? Because in the game of distrust, even silence can be a trap. I arrived at the bank shortly after 3 in the afternoon. First National has always been my place of trust. I opened my first account there in 1978, when I was still wearing construction overalls and carrying my salary wrapped in my pocket. I knew every wall, every manager who walked by, but the face that came to mind that day was that of James Ellison, the current vice president, a serious, soft-spoken young man who always treated me with respect. I called the day before asking for an informal conversation, and he, kind as always, received me in his office without asking too many questions. "Mr. David, it's always good to see you here. What can I help with?" I sat calmly. He doesn't smile. "James, I'll get straight to the point. I need to know if my son and daughter-in-law have been here in the last few days. And more than that, what they asked." He hesitated. He fiddled with the papers on the table, as if looking for time. But then he sighed and said, "Yes, they were. Weak. They said they were concerned about his mental health. They talked about how to proceed with legal protection in case of inability. They asked if there were active powers of attorney in his name, and if it would be possible to review or update certain accesses." I kept quiet, not because it didn't hurt, but because the pain had already crossed another level. Now it was just silence inside. "Did they mention my full name?" "Yes, they did. They said that you are getting confused, forgetting things, that maybe you were vulnerable. But, Mr. David, I'm sorry for the frankness, but you're more lucid than me." I found it all very strange, and so I preferred not to get involved with anything until I understood better. I nodded with a slight shake of my head. "You did it right, James, and I thank you for being honest with me." He seemed relieved that I hadn't exploded, but if he knew the fire that was already burning inside. I got up slowly. I thanked him again. He accompanied me to the elevator and before the door closed told me, "Anything you need, anything, you can look for me." Really. I went down to the parking lot with my hands in the pockets of my coat. The sky was closed, about to rain. I looked up and thought, so that's it. They wanted to take me out of the game, declare myself incapable, burying myself alive with signed paper and a smile on my face. I sat in the car, took a deep breath and called the number I hadn't dialed in years, Catherine Burke. She was one of the most respected notaries in Multnomah County, also my longtime friend. Together we have handled many property documents over the decades, but after she retired she moved away from everything. He answered the third call. "David? What a surprise. Catherine, I need you tomorrow. Serious matter. Can you come to my house?" The tone of her voice changed right away. "Of course. I'll be there at 9. I hung up and stayed there in the car, stopped, just listening to the breath, the glass starting to fog up with my quiet presence. And it was at that moment, without realizing it, that I muttered to myself, "How do you survive the blow that comes from your own house? Have you ever felt that? That arms where you thought you were safe? Were they, in fact, the ones holding the knife? Sometimes the greatest pain is not what they do to us, but who does it. If you've experienced something like this, comment here with a, "I know how it is," or "I understand you." Sometimes a phrase like this warms a heart on the other side of the screen. But that day, something inside me was consolidated. They messed with the wrong man. Not because I was smarter or stronger, but because I knew how to wait. And in the game of waiting, patience becomes a weapon. And that's when I thought, will Catherine agree to what I have in mind? And will the next step I will take, won't it seal the fate of this family once and for all? Because what's next? There is no turning back. I returned home that evening with my head red hot, but my heart steadfast. For the first time since it all began, I was no longer a cornered old man, but a silent man, preparing his own battlefield. Before I even took off my coat, I walked into the living room and started taking the frames off the walls. Behind one of them, hidden between the support and the plaster, was the recorder that I used in my construction days, when I needed to record meetings and conversations with suppliers. It still worked. I put new batteries, tested them. It worked as it did on the first day. I put one behind the bookshelf, another under the coffee table in the living room. A third, I hid behind the curtain, near the couch, where Brian always threw himself as the owner of the house. Then I went to my room. I took the blue notebook and wrote, Monday, Catherine's confirmed visit at 9 a.m. James around noon. Everything timed. Everything thought out. I knew that if I went straight to the attack, they would deny it. They would laugh, perhaps. They would call me confused. So I needed the missing piece, their confidence in my decline. If they believed I was weak, they would let their guard down. And that's what I was going to deliver. I went in front of the mirror in the hallway. An antique mirror, wooden frame that I sanded and varnished myself 20 years ago. I looked at myself carefully, the beard a little grown, the sunken eyes from a bad night's sleep, and I started rehearsing. Slower steps, a slight stumble at the entrance to the kitchen, a hand resting on his waist as if forgetting the way to his own sofa. And then, the main thing, the voice. Brian, it really reminds me. How old is Chloe? I mumbled, testing a hesitant tone. Oh yes, of course. Beaverton. That's where you live, right? So close, or was it Tigard? I smiled to myself. I knew exactly where they lived. I knew every number on their license plate. But in that theater, I would be the confused grandfather, the old man about to sign anything just to avoid a headache. The next day I knew they would come. Brian called the night before insisting, Dad, we really need to talk. I have some papers here. Quick thing. Can we stop by tomorrow morning? I pretended to hesitate. He said he would be a little tired, but in the end I agreed, like someone who wants to please. Okay, son. Yes, it comes. In the morning it's better. After my coffee. Before hanging up, he still said, and see if you can find that power of attorney paper. The one you signed when you got sick in 2018, remember? I vaguely remember, son. I'll look it up. Turned off. But in that instant, every cell in my body was on alert. They were going to try. Finally. And I would be waiting. I went back to the office. I separated all receipts, statements, and deposit receipts with highlighter. I wrote dates, values, the reasons, school, retirement, car, trip. I put everything in a red folder, visible but discreetly next to the table, as bait, and on the shelf the old will with the signature already yellowed which said that Brian was my direct heir. On the side, the new one, still without a date, but ready for signature. A difference? The fund reserved only for Chloe, and a foundation that Ellen dreamed of opening in our name. Brian's name. It didn't even show up. In the evening, I sat in the armchair on the balcony. The sky was clear. The moon reflected in the windows as if Ellen herself were watching me. I looked at her portrait, hanging on the living room wall, and whispered as if she were still there. I will not allow them to destroy what we have built. I won't. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, because the next day would no longer be an ordinary Sunday. It would be the final rehearsal before the truth. And there, either they fell for good, or I fell with dignity. But what I didn't know was that Brian had already made another call that night. And this connection, it would change everything. At 10 o'clock, I heard the sound of their car parking in front of my house. Brian was always punctual when there was money involved. I looked through the crack in the curtain and saw Karen coming down with the black leather briefcase pressed against her chest, as if carrying something valuable. Brian was close behind with a smile I hadn't seen in years, one that doesn't touch the eyes. I turned around, adjusted the blanket on my lap, turned off the kettle before it beeped, and went to the door with slow steps, as rehearsed. Father, Brian said, opening his arms as if he were the most loving son in the world. Glad to see you excited today. Good morning, dear father, Karen added in that sweet voice she only used when she wanted something. We brought a few things to make your life easier, see? I made a soft gesture with my hand, as if I didn't quite understand. I kept my gaze a little vacant, my speech slightly spaced. Ah, good to see you. Today is... what day really? Karen and Brian looked at each other. Karen smiled as if to say, it's working. Sunday, Dad. You remembered yesterday. But that's okay, we understand. It's a lot on my mind. They got in and sat down on the couch. Karen soon opened the folder and began to line up the papers on the coffee table. Brian stood aside, watching my reactions as if he were a therapist in disguise. I glanced down the hallway. I knew that on the other side of the half-open door, Catherine and James were silent, recording, watching, ready. Karen began to explain in the voice of someone who cradles a baby. Look, David, it's just a few simple authorizations. Nothing much. Things that will help us take care of everything for you. Bills, appointments, those boring things. So you can relax, rest, and if one day you want to live in a quieter place like an assisted living, we take care of everything. I nodded slowly, feigning reflection. So, will you help me with everything? With everything, Brian replied, putting his hand on my shoulder. We've always been here for that. Until, choose where to live, if applicable? I asked, my voice weak, almost whispered. But of course, Dad, Karen said, touching my hand gently. It's just love, see? I smiled. A slow smile. Empty. Just as they expected. Brian took a pen out of his pocket and placed it on the papers. Karen pushed one of the documents in my direction. Broad and unrestricted power of attorney. Another said, asset management on behalf of third parties. A third, donation in life with reservation of usufruct. I read everything with veiled eyes, as if I didn't understand. But each line burned on my skin as if it had been written with fire. No, there are moments in life when we realize how much the world can turn upside down in silence. And if this piece of my story can become a mirror or a hug for someone, can it help me carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. And who knows, it may reach someone who needs to hear that there is still time to turn the tide. I gave a slight cough, held the pen as if it was too heavy for my hand. But I didn't sign. I just looked them in the eyes and said, very slowly, they are really my family, right? Brian laughed. Karen shook my hand. Of course we are, Dad. We always have been. And for a moment they relaxed. They let out that air of someone who thinks he has won. It was at that moment that I looked down the hall and gave the slightest wave. The handle turned slowly. James entered first. Dark suit, steady gaze. Catherine close behind with her briefcase. The sound of their presence cut through the room like a razor. Karen turned pale. Brian widened his eyes. What? What is it? Brian stammered. But I just adjusted my body in the armchair, firm as an old oak tree. And with the clearest voice I've used in days, I replied, that is the beginning of the truth, my son. But do you think they were silent? Or did they still try to reverse the situation, even in the face of the truth? Because what came next, it was even more revealing. Brian froze the same moment James entered the room. The color disappeared from his face like paint washed away by heavy rain. Karen still tried to disguise it, arranging the papers on the table, but her hands trembled. James introduced himself politely, but without hiding his firmness. James Ellison, Vice President of First National Bank. We are here at the request of Mr. David to record and witness this conversation. Catherine, always elegant, added, Catherine Burke, retired notary. I am here as an independent observer and responsible for the legal verification of any signature or claim made at this meeting. Karen cleared her throat. I don't understand. This was just to make things easier for Mr. David. Why call these people? I straightened up in my chair, rested my hands on my knees, and looked into both of their eyes. There was no more hesitation in me, just clarity. You two came here today with a script, sweet words, a ready smile, and a folder with my condemnation. They wanted me to sign my own erasure, as if it were any other piece of paper. But I already knew everything before the door opened. Brian even tried to laugh, a weak fake laugh. Dad, you're exaggerating. It was just to help. You've been forgetting things. We were worried. Worried? I interrupted in a firmer voice. So, why were you at the bank asking about legal guardianship? About how to speed up a power of attorney? About what to do with an elderly person considered mentally incapable? James intervened calmly. They asked me this directly. I thought it was suspicious, so I accepted Mr. David's invitation to be here today. Karen turned sharply to Brian. You said he wouldn't know anything. It was as if her mask broke right there, on a Sunday. I know more than you think, I continued. And I have proof. I reached out and took the briefcase by my side. From the inside, I pulled out the bank statements for the past 3 years, all with handmade markings, deposits, transfers, orders. Each one with the date, the amount, and the justification. Then I took the small recorder and pressed play. The room was filled with a suffocating silence, broken only by Karen's sweet voice recorded on the previous visit. He's already too old to take care of so many things. We just need him to sign soon. And soon after, Brian's voice. If he resists, we can use that argument of confusion, remember? He keeps forgetting. When the recording ended, neither James nor Catherine said anything. They didn't need to. The truth was there. Naked. Brian swallowed. Karen squeezed her own wrist as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. It was to protect you, Dad. Interest. We were just trying to make sure that nothing was lost, that everything was used responsibly. Responsibly, I repeated almost in a whisper. You wanted to lock me up in an institution, isolate me in old age, and manage my name as if it were an investment fund. This is not careful. This is ambition, cold and disguised as love. Catherine took the floor firmly. Everything was recorded, including this conversation, and I can guarantee that any subsequent attempt to force a signature will be considered an attempt at fraud. Mr. David is lucid, fully capable, and now has documented evidence. Karen began to cry. I don't know if it was regret, or just the pain of having been discovered. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. But they hurt, I replied, with the calmness of someone who no longer needs to scream to be heard. And the worst was not out of greed. It was because of the coldness, for the certainty that I no longer counted as a human being, only as an obstacle. Brian looked at the floor. He mumbled an excuse, but he didn't even have the courage to look up. And it was there, in that tense silence, that I said a phrase that I have carried with me since that day. Sometimes, who we raise the most. He is the one who tries to erase us the most. And you who are here with me until now. It continues because what comes after that moment was what moved me the most. What made me understand the true value of dignity the most. But would they, even unmasked, accept defeat? Or they would even try to turn the tide, in a dirtier way? Because when pride is hurt, what's left can be even more dangerous. The silence after the recording was heavy, but it was not a silence of fear, nor of doubt. It was the silence that comes when the truth finally imposes itself and no one else has the courage to pretend. I looked at Brian, then Karen. Both seemed smaller than ever, as if the ground had disappeared under their feet. Catherine adjusted her glasses and opened the briefcase she had brought. He carefully took out a set of sheets with an official seal and held it out to me. I held it, took a deep breath, and stared at them both. I wish I had avoided that. I swear by everything I have experienced with you. But after what they've done, I can't pretend anymore. Here is the New Testament. Karen pursed her lips. Brian seemed to shrink. Starting today, everything I've built, this house, the investments, the funds, will be transferred to an educational trust in Chloe's name. She will be able to access this money only when she turns 21, with legal support from outside the family. None of you will have control over this. Brian straightened up on the couch, his eyes watering not with regret, but of revolt. Dad, you can't do that. It's unfair. I am your son. It's because it's my son that it hurts so much, Brian, I replied. But I'm also a father, and I learned that protecting, sometimes it's putting limits. What you tried to do is not forgivable, but it has consequences. Catherine approached calmly. These documents are ready for authentication, but there is a clause that Mr. David has asked me to include. You can retain the right to a basic monthly allowance if you sign this official waiver of any future claim to inheritance now. If they don't sign, nor does this remain. Karen stared furiously at the paper. This is blackmail. No, I replied calmly. This is justice. The real blackmail is what they tried to do to me with these papers here. I pointed to their folder on the table. They pretended to be careful while planning my interdiction. They lied. They manipulated my granddaughter. Now they reap what they sowed. Brian stood. Are you disinheriting us? No. I'm protecting what my wife and I took a lifetime to build. And the only person who showed true love here, it was an 8-year-old child. There was a moment when everything stopped. Catherine was waiting for my authorization. James just watched. And I looked again at Ellen's portrait on the wall. I remembered when we painted that room together, laughing with our hair dirty with paint. I remembered the first night in this house, of the love letters hidden in the drawer, of the simple birthdays, the stormy nights that we spent hugging on the couch. There are memories that stick to us like old perfume. You close your eyes, and she's still there, strong, alive, as if it had just happened. And if you've been listening to this story so far, tell me, what is the memory that lives the most inside you? Comment below. It can be something small, a phrase, a smell, a song. Sometimes, It is in these memories that we find the strength to continue. I signed the New Testament with firm hands. Catherine did the same, authenticating right there. Brian and Karen said nothing more. They did not sign the waiver. They just got up, took the briefcase, and left without looking back. The door closed with a thud. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just breathed, with the lightness of someone who, for the first time in a long time, knew that he was safe inside his own home. But would that be the end of the dirty game? Or would they, wounded and humiliated, return with an even darker plan? Because their silence, when leaving, it didn't look like someone who gave up. It looked like someone who retreated to attack in another way. Brian was still standing, but he seemed to be crumbling inside. The shoulders slumped, the eyes red, the mouth trembling as if every word that tried to come out was loaded with pain. Or regret, I can't say. He reached out in an awkward attempt to hug me, and for the first time in a long time I saw my son as a lost boy. Aimless. "Dad, please," he said, his voice breaking. I got lost. I thought it was the right thing. I let Karen convince me that you wouldn't be able to handle everything. I made a mistake. Forgive me, Dad. Give me a chance, just one. I didn't move. His hug stopped in midair, because there was a time when I would have opened my arms, but at that time had passed, and what he felt now was not true guilt. It was the despair of those who saw the fountain dry up. Karen, on the other hand, exploded like a poorly armed bomb. He got up from his chair with a red face, his eyes fierce. "This is an injustice," he shouted, pointing at me as if I was the villain of the story. "He's taking revenge on us. He's using all this staging to take us out of the game. He always had this preference for Chloe. He always thought I wasn't good enough for his son. Now you've set up this little theater with these two," she pointed to Catherine and James, "to make it look like you're in control. But he's not well. He forgets everything, repeats things, speaks to the portrait of his dead wife. This is not sanity." The accusation fell like a thunderbolt in the room. Catherine adjusted her glasses with the same calmness as someone who had seen this type of scene more than once. "Mrs. Karen," she said firmly, "I have been a notary for more than 30 years. I have witnessed countless signatures in delicate moments, and I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, that Mr. David is in full mental capacity. He is lucid, conscious, articulate, and, more than anything, is emotionally stable," James added, crossing his arms. "And as a representative of First National Bank, I can confirm that Mr. David has conducted all recent actions with complete clarity, knowledge, and judgment. He even warned me about irregular movements even before I could identify them." Karen seemed to puff up with anger, and then empty. Like a punctured balloon, it fell back on the couch. No more words, only his eyes fixed on the ground. Brian, still standing, muttered, We lost, right?" "You haven't lost your inheritance, Brian," I replied, my voice low but firm. "You have lost the confidence of someone who would lay down his life for you. And this loss, this one has no will that can fix it." He covered his face with his hands and began to cry. He cried like a man who finally realized the gravity of what he did, but too late. Karen, proud to the end, didn't shed a tear. She just stood there, mute, as her world slowly crumbled. No, there are pains that we feel inside, that don't make noise, pains that we don't scream about, but that lodge in a corner of the soul and stay there, poking, remembering. And this scene, it will be one of the last that I will take with me forever. The break, the fall, and the emptiness that comes after. What I didn't know, and would discover shortly after, is that their silence that day was only the harbinger of something even more dangerous. Because when someone loses everything, may decide to sink, or drag others with it. Would Brian accept defeat? Or did Karen still have one last card? Because the way they left that room, it left me with a cold feeling in my chest, as if something was yet to come. Brian was still there, sitting in the same place, as if his legs were no longer responding, his face swollen, his eyes lost. Karen, on the other hand, rose like a hurricane. He took his bag, pushed the papers off the table with a quick gesture, and darted towards the door. "This is abuse disguised as moralism, David. You want to control us as if you were God, so keep your house, your fortune, and your hero pose. I don't need it." The door slammed. It was just me and Brian. The clock on the wall made more noise than usual. I walked up to him, slowly, feeling each step with the weight of the story we carried. I sat next to him unhurried. I took a deep breath before speaking. Brian, you are still my son, and as much as I felt like erasing everything, closing the doors for good, I know the man you can be. I saw this man when you were younger before everything became calculation and haste. Therefore, I want to offer you a choice. He looked at me with his eyes still teary. What choice, Father? You've decided everything. Not yet, listening. I paused for a second. If you can get back on your feet, find a stable job, support your house without needing me. If you're a good father to Chloe and prove it to me with attitudes for a whole year without a penny from me. So perhaps in the future I will review the terms of the fund. Perhaps. He widened his eyes as if he didn't understand. You're giving me a chance? It's not a chance, Brian. It's a lesson. You tried to take everything I've built from me. Now if they want something, they will have to learn how to build it from scratch. I don't want your suffering, but I will not feed your cowardice either. This path, it's up to you. He was silent for long minutes, his eyes fixed on the ground. His breathing was still heavy, but different. It seemed more real, as if something is moving inside. I got up from the chair and walked away slowly. Before leaving the room, he said, "The door still exists, son, but now, it's you who needs to hit." I left Brian there alone, surrounded by silence and choices. I didn't look back. He didn't need to. That moment wasn't about me anymore. It was about what he would do with what was left. But inside, something still worried me. Because Karen was not the type to accept defeat. And the way she left, it made me feel that the game wasn't over yet. Was she up to something in the shadows? Or had that been, in fact, his last cry? Something told me that the worst was yet to come. Chloe arrived late that afternoon, her stride swings and her backpack swaying as if she carried the world inside her. He had on his face that mixture of innocence and wisdom that only children with a clean heart can have. Before he even hugged me, he looked into my eyes for a while. A complicit silence. That kind of silence that needs no explanation. Then she opened her arms and wrapped me tightly. I stood there feeling that hug as if it were medicine. And maybe it was. I took her to the couch. I made a hot chocolate, just the way Ellen made it for her on visits. I adjusted the cushions, pulled the blanket, and sat next to her. There was no more hurry in me, no fear, only the truth. And it was time to deliver it delicately, like someone offering a flower in a garden that was almost stepped on. Chloe, remember when you told me that in the hallway of your party? She nodded very slowly. I thought you were going to be mad at me. Never. What you did was courage, my girl. And that's why I promised you that I would take care of everything, remember? I remember. Well, I took care of it. And now, I want to tell you something about your future. She looked at me with those attentive eyes, more attentive than many adult people who have crossed my path. I took her little hand, held her tight. Whatever happens to your parents, you're protected. I organized everything to ensure that when you grow up you have freedom. You will be able to study whatever you want. Travel, live wherever you dream. You will be able to choose what to do with your life with your own heart. Chloe kept quiet. He fiddled with the corner of his blouse with his little fingers. Then he said, "Are they leaving?" That question was like a stone thrown into a calm lake. It made waves, but I took a deep breath and replied fondly, "They need to learn some lessons. Sometimes growing up hurts, but I'm still here. And you will never be alone." She then leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "And if one day, I want to take care of you, Grandpa." At that moment my throat tightened, because there was everything. True love, the promise fulfilled, life making sense again because of such a simple phrase. So, my dear, I'll know it was all worth it. We stayed like this for a while. The clock marked the passing of the hours, but inside me time had stopped. There were no more documents, accusations, screams. There was only that moment, that bow, and there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up and let's make this story reach those who need it. Because sometimes, all someone needs, it's hearing that you can still trust, you can still love. Chloe fell asleep right there on the couch with the chocolate still half full, and I kept watching as if protecting a piece of the sky that fell to earth. But even in that moment of peace, There was a small shadow in the corner of his mind, an intuition that I couldn't silence. Did Karen really give up? Or was her silence just the break before the last attempt? Because the kind of ambition she carried, he doesn't usually leave without fighting again. The house was quieter than ever. But it wasn't the same silence as before. The one that screamed absence, that hurt in the corners of the walls and echoed Ellen's absence. Brian's estrangement, the distance disguised as short visits. No, this new silence had another weight. It was a choice. It was rest. It was, in a way, freedom. The morning after the conversation with Chloe, I woke up early. The sun came through the kitchen window with a delicacy that I hadn't noticed in a long time. I prepared my coffee as I always did, but without haste. I sat on the porch, the newspaper in my hand, the sound of birds in the yard, and I stayed there, for almost an hour, just watching the world follow its course, without having to run after it. I spent the rest of the week like this, going back to the things I left along the way. I took care of Ellen's garden, the one she loved so much. I removed the dried leaves of the magnolia tree we planted on our first wedding anniversary. I watered the roses, pruned the bushes. Each flower that bloomed seemed to say, "You are here again." And I was. I also wrote. I took out an old notebook and started writing letters to Chloe, one per month. I kept them all in envelopes with specific dates, when she turns 12, 15, 18, 21. Things that only a grandparent can say. Advice, memories, stories that she may never hear from her parents. I wrote as someone who sews memories into the fabric of time. I bought a safe too, small but sturdy. In it, I kept copies of all the documents of the educational fund, the recordings, the signed terms, and a USB stick with a video that I recorded for her. In the video, I speak calmly. I'll explain everything. I say that true love sometimes requires firmness, that protecting someone is not always saying yes, and that she should never feel guilty for having spoken the truth, even if it changed everything. It's curious, as sometimes we only understand life when we start to close the cycles. I didn't expect any more calls from Brian, and I confess, I missed it. Not his voice lying, but the memory of the boy who once was, of the little boy who jumped on my lap with his knees scraped and said, "Dad, look what I did." That Brian is gone, maybe forever, and accept that. It was like dropping an anchor that I didn't even know it was dragging. But mind you, there is something I learned late. But I learned, peace is expensive. It demands renunciations. Sometimes of people, sometimes of illusions. And when we finally pay that price, the soul breathes. For the first time, I slept without fear. No hiding safe key. Without asking me what they were up to behind the hugs. I lived with the truth, even if it hurt. No, if you've made it this far in this story, I need to tell you, the most memorable moment is yet to come. Because what comes after betrayal, it's not just justice, it is the new beginning. And start over, my friend. It's for a few. That Thursday afternoon, I sat in Ellen's chair, as I always did. I took one of the letters written and reread it. Smile. And as the sun descended behind the rooftops, I found myself wondering, would this lull last? Or was the silence just an interval before the last thunder? Because deep down, something told me that Karen, he had not yet taken his last step. The phone rang on a Friday afternoon. I was cleaning the tools in the shed when I heard the sound coming from the room. I put the cloth aside, walked there with a calmer heart than I expected. It wasn't anyone's day to call. Most people already knew that I liked silence. When I answered, the voice on the other end took a long time to speak. It was the kind of silence that carries weight. That kind of silence that comes when someone is rehearsing from an early age what they are going to say. "Dad, it's me." It was Brian. His voice was not the same. He didn't have that defensive intonation nor the false lightness he used to hide intentions. It was a voice, tired, human, low, almost hoarse. He took a deep breath before continuing. I started working at a dealership, right here, in Beaverton. Sales. It's not much, but it's something. Karen, he's living with his mother. It's taking a break. I don't know what it will be, but I think it was the best for now. I listened to everything in silence. I leaned against the doorframe, looking at the old clock on the wall. Time seemed to slip slowly, as if each word of it opened a crack in the past. I didn't interrupt. I didn't judge. I just let him speak. I just wanted to know, If you still have any hope between us, you know? The question remained in the air, like smoke. There was no tone of demand. It was just a request. Late, perhaps, but sincere. I took a deep breath. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept calm, because at that time I understood that forgiveness is not a key that we hand over. It is a road that the other needs to walk alone, and I couldn't tell him if it was already at the end or still at the beginning. Brian, I hope you're taking good care of Chloe. The rest, life will show. There were no screams, nor tears, just a respectful silence on the other end of the line. And then, I hung up. I stood there, with the phone still in my hand, staring at nothingness for a while. The phrase kept echoing inside me, not as a punishment but as a reminder. I don't hate my son. I never hated it. But I will also not sell myself again for the illusion that everything can be fixed with words. Because who really wants to go back? Different return. Maybe he will come back. Maybe not. But now, for the first time in a long time, it no longer defines my peace. Because what I have left, it is more valuable than anything they tried to take away. But that evening, as I put my phone in the holder and walked to the kitchen to prepare my tea, I saw through the window a car parking slowly across the street. And what happened right after made me understand that the story had not yet come to an end. I sat down at my old desk, the corner that Ellen always said was my sanctuary of thoughts. I picked up the diary I've kept since the 1980s, the one she taught me to use when we built our first house, full of yellowed pages and time-worn lines. Opening the notebook is like opening a portal to decades of life. Every written word carries the smell of old paper and memories that insist on remaining alive. I started writing. First, describing Chloe's party, Brian and Karen's forced smiles, Granddaughter's genuine joy. Every detail mattered, from the way she unwrapped the Lego from the White House to the worried look she gave when she noticed the tension in the air. I recorded her whisper in the hallway. "Grandpa, tonight my parents are going to take your fortune." I couldn't help but feel the weight of that phrase once again. Each letter written made me relive the shock, the silent anger, and the determination that came after. I then began to write about the plan, the mobilization of the discreet allies, the visit to the bank, the presence of Catherine and James, the rehearsal of my performance of a confused old man, the theater I prepared to expose Brian and Karen. And as I described every detail, I realized that the biggest victory was not legal or financial but emotional. I regained my dignity. I regained my control over the life I built, and above all, I secured Chloe's future. As I wrote, I reflected on how life dismantles our certainties. The house that took me decades to build, the businesses that I built brick by brick, the funds and investments that I carefully managed. All of these are valuable, of course, but I have found that what really matters is not the patrimony, nor the material inheritance. What matters is the courage to start over, even when you think you are too old for change. It is the ability to protect those who love from those who do not know how to love without interest. It is learning that limits and firmness are worth more than any fake smile. As he wrote, memories were intertwined with silent teachings. I remembered Ellen, her advice on prudence, patience, and observation. She said, "Norman, what you don't see is often more important than what you show." And there was the truth before me. The most precious thing I build has no bricks, no mortar, no numbers in a bank account. It is the courage to say enough, to defend what is right, to protect those who still know how to love with innocence without interest. Chloe is my invisible legacy, more valuable than any physical work I've ever erected. I also wrote about the quiet moments of reflection that followed the storm. The walks around the yard, taking care of Ellen's garden, watering each plant with extra attention, as if each leaf represented a thread of memory, a piece of history that deserves to be preserved. The letters written to Chloe, kept with future dates, each carrying advice, memories, and love. The safe with the documents. The video recorded with the hope that she understands what has been done to protect her. All of this has become a kind of invisible construct, where every silent action forms a fortress that protects the future. As I closed the pen at the bottom of the page, I realized something I had never understood so clearly. The greatest work of my life was not the apartment we built in Beaverton for Brian and Karen, nor the houses I planned for my clients, nor even the house where I live in Laurelhurst. It was my ability to start over at the age of 72, to restore my own peace, to teach, even if indirectly, that true love requires courage and firmness. It was to create emotional and moral protection for Chloe, who will be able to grow up with freedom, choice, and security, without relying on the flawed integrity of others. I felt the stillness of the late afternoon coming through the window. The garden reflected the sunlight as if each leaf shone in silent celebration. Ellen's memories came like a gentle breath. Her laughter, her hand holding out hot coffee, the advice whispered at the end of a stormy afternoon. Never allow the interest of others to define your life. Smile. I understood that life, with all its betrayals and surprises, is also an opportunity to show strength and dignity, even when all seems lost. And it was at that moment that I realized, building is not just about building walls or accumulating wealth. To build is to protect. It is teaching by example. It is raising one's life when others try to bring it down. Every page written, every silent gesture, every firm decision I made after that Chloe party, every document carefully reviewed and signed, every conversation with discreet allies, all of it makes up my invisible work. A work that perhaps no one will see from the outside, but one that will sustain a lifetime. Chloe's. As I put away the diary and closed the desk, I felt a deep peace. The echo of betrayal, the weight of broken expectations and the anguish of disappointments no longer belonged to me. They were there as lessons, but they no longer dominated my daily life. For the first time in years, I lived without fear of being deceived, without fear that my story would be manipulated. There was freedom in silence, strength in chosen solitude, and a discreet joy in knowing that I did what needed to be done. I looked at the garden illuminated in the late afternoon and thought, life knocks us down, challenges us, forces us to doubt everything, but it also gives us the chance to build something bigger than any house or asset, something called courage, integrity, and true love. The work that is most worthwhile is the one that protects those who still know how to love without interest. Chloe, my granddaughter, my hope, my invisible legacy. And even as I write these lines, I feel that the story is not over yet, because life has a curious way of testing the strength of what we build. I ask myself, looking out the window and feeling the spring wind on my face, have those who tried to knock me down learned anything from the fall? Or is the shadow of their ambition still lurking around, ready to try again? Because to build something invisible, my friend, is also to be prepared for the world to see, or not see, the true solidity of what remains when everything around seems to collapse. I closed the last letter to Chloe, felt the weight and lightness of each word at once, and stood up slowly. I walked to the garden, the same one Ellen cultivated with so much affection, and planted a new rosebush seedling as if each petal was a symbol of memory, love, and resilience. I looked at the ground we were tending to together and realized that, despite everything, I survived the disappointments and manipulative attempts of those who were supposed to love me. Brian and Karen went their own ways, each confronting their choices, and I finally saw that justice doesn't need applause. It feels in the silence of conscience and in the security of those who protect those who still know how to truly love. Chloe, my granddaughter, is growing up with freedom without fear, and with the certainty that true love includes boundaries, protection, and integrity. Today, I walk through the house without tension, my heart light, my spirit serene. I learned, after all, that life tests us, puts us to the test, and teaches us that winning is not shouting or imposing, but waiting, observing, and acting at the right time. The biggest victory was not financial, but emotional, preserving the future of those who really matter and doing it with dignity. And the lesson that remains is simple, but powerful. Love requires courage, limits, and patience. To forgive does not mean to forget, and to protect is not to control. It is to act with silent wisdom. Every obstacle, every betrayal, every doubt serves to teach us to measure our steps and to value what really has value: respect, true affection, and emotional freedom. It is a truth that applies to any family, any friendship, any human relationship. Keep this to yourself, because life is too short to spend energy on people who do not understand the value of genuine love. I want to thank you for sticking with me this far, listening to every word as if we were having a coffee together. Knowing that someone connects with these stories makes each story worthwhile. If this video touched your heart, enjoy it, like a hug that warms and supports this channel. Sign up as if you're accepting the invitation to come back to the next cafe right here with me. And let us know in the comments which city you're watching, so we can feel closer, building a community of shared stories and memories. Activate the bell, so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. And don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story, and discover more chapters of life, courage, and silent justice, which teach that it is never too late to protect those you love and live with dignity.